Welcome to Great Taste. I'm your host, Steve Boss. 60 Minutes of Deliciousness upcoming. Maggie Zhu is my guest. She's the author of Chinese Homestyle Cooking, Everyday Plant-Based Recipes for Takeout, Dim Sum, Noodles, and more. Zhu grew up in Beijing, China. She moved to Austin, Texas, and after that, she moved to New York City, where she currently works full-time on her award-winning blog. That's Omnivores Cookbook. She started that blog in 2013, and she also works on other writing projects, recipe development, plus photography. Matter of fact, all of the teasing, mouth-watering photographs that you'll find in Chinese home-style cooking were taken by Zhu. She writes that her mission is to help more people get to know real Chinese food and expose less-known regional cuisines, such as Northern and Xinjiang food, to a broader audience. More importantly, I want to show you, she writes, how easy it is to cook with wholesome ingredients in your kitchen to create delicious dishes that are like the ones you have in Chinese restaurants. Maggie, welcome to the show.
Hi, it's such a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's a real pleasure for me. I'm very excited. Before we get into the book, I wonder if you could explain Chinese food, because it's a bit more complex than simply using that catch-all phrase. And I'd love for you to give just some insight into that term.
It's actually a very difficult question to answer because I think there's so much to it. I think there are different opinions. Because I feel like I live in the US, I feel like the most familiar ones are the takeout. The stir fries, the chow mein, the fried noodles and the egg drop soup and all that, which are true. But in China, we have so many regions. Like for example, for me, I grew up in the north, so the food I eat growing up are quite different. Someday I might meet someone from different part of China and we talk like what you usually eat for Chinese New Year or like what for dinner usually, and it can be very, very different. But at the same time, I feel like even there are very different flavor profiles and ingredients we use in different regions. There are certain common elements, like for example, we like to use a lot of vegetables in cooking, like produce different types of like grains and sometimes bread and noodles. And we do use meat, like in all different forms, and to add flavors, to add textures. But I think vegetable is really a center part of the cuisine. And I think one thing about why Chinese food is amazing is that it sometimes it can take really cheap ingredients because it's a big country and a lot of areas are not maybe they don't grow that many crops well, and people might not able to afford like very fancy ingredients. And like back in the days, like in the early 90s, we didn't eat that much meat like nowadays. But the thing is, we can take really cheap ingredients, sometimes just like grass, you just like those weeds, into really delicious dishes by using spices and sauces.
Mm. Another thing that intrigued me, again, before we get into the actual recipes and the book itself, is that in the acknowledgement section, you wrote, my parents, you thanked your parents, you thanked them, you said, my parents for being very open-minded and supportive of the path I've chosen. Mm-hmm. And I wondered, that seemed very personal, and I wondered if you could just share something about that.
It's interesting because they didn't always support it. I grew up in a traditional Asian family, like traditional homemade goods, like great cooking. Like my mom just like really devoted, and they did a lot for me. Like they did so much to make me like study to get, I don't know, successful in my life. I think they did a lot to help me. But for career wise, they were very concerned at the beginning. I did because I always loved creativity works, and I did a lot of things like drawing, calligraphies, and painting growing up. And I even did like works like like drawing stuff for magazines growing up. And they were very concerned, like, oh, please do not become an artist because like you're not going to make a living. Just forget it. I kind of did for a while. So I like I was like, okay, I need to, after graduation, gotta find a real job. So I kind of gave up some of those hobbies. that I really enjoyed early on. So I took a bank job. But it's really funny because I think I didn't really like the job, to put it mildly. Um, so I was like, I tried very, very hard to think of something else to do, which kind of led me into creating the food blog because I just like bored out of my brain, just like, oh, I cannot do this. I need to find something else. In that sense, I really like, I feel very thankful. If I did not have that path, maybe I never discovered this like passion. Uh, and since then, you know, I've been sticking to it for many, many years, and now I'm making a full-time living of it. And my parents are pretty happy with it. And yeah, and sometimes they brag about it, right? Which I feel like, okay, I'm pretty proud.
Well, I'm sure they can see how happy you are doing it. So
Yeah,
yeah, and there's not much more important for parents than to see that their kids.
it is. Yeah, I know, but it's so funny because you know, there's a couple of times I visited like you know their friends, like you know those Chinese parents, and they kind of admire my parents. They're like, wow, you actually let her do it. I wouldn't. Very, 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 very Asian thing to do.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I appreciate your sharing that. So, all right, tell us a little bit about, you know, you said that this is what kind of led you to your own food journey because you write in the book that traditionally, as I gathered, a child's place isn't in the kitchen in traditional Chinese kitchens.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the family. I have friends who have like help in the kitchen, especially when the parents are really busy. You know, it's like, oh, you just do the chores, like don't ask, like you should do this and this. My family, they're more relaxed. They want me to focus on study. My mom especially, she like just please go do your homework. Like I'm gonna take care of this. Like you're just gonna mess it up. So I didn't learn a thing. I observed. I think it helps a lot because I feel like even I've never cooked anything before, like they never taught me things, but I kind of know how to do things just by looking at them. I think I probably made like my first fried rice without like anyone teaching me. I just did it. So that helps, but also like it does. I also mentioned a little bit in the book that how I actually moved to Japan and I actually started to learn from website like recipes from like you know Japanese magazines and books and blogs.
Okay, so in Chinese homestyle cooking, the recipes are all plant-based. How did that come about?
Um, it was most actually at the beginning was because of my husband Thomas. He is a runner and he trains for races and marathon. And he discovered that plant-based is like good for running, and we decided to try this out at home for like a couple months, and he loves it because it helped him to recover running, like training faster. And you know, it's like and over you know, it's like you eat the meal, and after a while, you just don't feel like super heavy, or you know, you don't. It doesn't take too long to digest, so you can like start it to do something immediately after eating. And I found that very helpful too, because you know, if I eat a really heavy lunch with meat and a lot of protein, I would like I need like a lot of coffee in the afternoon to keep me awake. But if I eat plant-based, even sometimes even when I eat a lot like vegetables and grains and tofu, I don't feel heavy. And I feel like, oh, I can start working or like I do yoga and I do those activities and it does help me to feel better overall. So right now I am not fully vegan, but we do eat a lot of plant-based meals at home, and I still really like to have that as a part of my lifestyle because I think vegetables are very good for you. They're delicious too, and they're easy to prepare.
Mhm. So you write that you take a less labor-intensive approach while maintaining the taste and look of the dish. Can you
Mhm.
explain that in some more detail?
So for me, I feel like Chinese cooking can be complicated sometimes. I always hear my readers talking about, oh, it's hard to get preps. Like there are so many ingredients. I do agree. You know, you do. I feel like compared to certain type of dishes, it you know it does use like it does seems like it's quite long sometimes. And Chinese cooking also use certain techniques. sometimes it requires deep frying food, and sometimes it requires like different, how to say, like no matter it's cutting, prepping, and cooking, it does take a little bit of time for like a one simple dishes. So my goal is to make it very, very approachable for home cooks who has never done this before. For example, sometimes I tell people like, oh, forget about the wok, just get a skillet, because if you're cooking on an electric stove, you're not going to get the wok hot enough. It's just like not a proper setup. And even when you use a gas stove, sometimes it's like I've used gas stove that is like kind of weak. It doesn't heat up a wok properly. So I want people to use whatever tools that are they already have and that they're comfortable with, and with cooking method is because say restaurant when they cook protein or like even for vegetables, they like to flash fry stuff to get certain textures and like like or like a battered thing or lightly battered things. It's really, I feel like I wouldn't want to do it myself. After a long day of work, I'm gonna like I want like a cauliflower dish and I want to fry them. Like no, nobody's gonna do that. So I try to find alternative method. It's like, oh, if you still want, like in my orange cauliflower, you still want this like nice crunchy texture, but obviously you don't want to deep fry them. But so I find a way to create this very light batter, and you use pan fry, and you can still create this like very nice texture. So that's the goal.
So you've taken a number of dishes that most people would be familiar with if they eat Chinese food, and especially as you've mentioned, Chinese takeout, for example.
Yeah.
Like egg drop soup, sweet and sour soup, Buddha's delight, Dan noodles, hao tofu, and many others, including, here's one from today's lunch, matter of fact.
Oh.
But you know what that is?
The beef from is that the tofu and broccoli?
How do you say?
Oh, that's a General Tso's tofu.
General Tso's tofu. Now I had to force myself to save that little amount because I wanted to eat it, but I wanted to show you, so I forced myself to save a tiny bit, and I'm just going to, be a little rude and just remind myself of how good it was. It's cold, but it's really good. And so what I can do now is I can say to everyone, everything that you just heard Maggie say is exactly how that recipe worked. She took this, what many of us might find a challenging dish to make, and made it really easy. Matter of fact, I think the prep time was like 15 minutes maybe, and the cook time was like 10 or 15 minutes. I mean, it was very simple and easy to do. If I had to say, one thing that I changed a little bit was that you were mentioning that when I coated the tofu in cornstarch and put it into the peanut oil to saute essentially on high heat, and that you mentioned I think turning each one over. I said, I'm not doing it. I took a spatula and just said, okay, I'm going to turn it several times, and I'm sure it's going to get crisp.
That's probably fine.
Yeah, right. It'll be fine. But that's the beauty of cooking too. You can look at the recipe and say, oh, I'm going to make this change. And you're right. I know that's the right way to do it. I did it this way because it was just a little bit even simpler for me, but it was delicious. And so if we could, just so I could get some background into this, this is a dish that most people are familiar with that have gone to Chinese restaurants, right? Well, do we have any idea, where did this come from? Who's General Tso? Is that important?
Yeah. Sorry, this dish does not exist in China.
Okay.
I'd say there are things that might be very similar, but the dish and the name, I have no idea. I did a lot of research into it. I was trying to find who this is. Nah, not a thing. If you go to China, I don't know. I don't think people they probably don't know what that is.
That's
sorry about that. Though.
But that's all right, because that's so common, right? I mean, there's an Indian, what is it? Some kind of butter chicken, a chicken.
I think so. Yeah, I was surprised too. I did not know that. I was it's so tasty.
Right, so tasty. But I think a British person came up with it, or something like that. Anyway. Yeah. Okay, so anyway, you've taken these recipes that I've mentioned and many more, and you transform them into plant-based, because most of them, or many of them at least, had some form of whether it was meat or eggs or whatever, component. Yeah. to them. And but those weren't the only changes that you made to these recipes. But you've already alluded to some, in terms of, maybe cooking methodology, maybe equipment, a lot of different things. So it's not as simple as somebody just looks at a recipe and says, oh, I'm going to make that vegetarian, or I'm going to make that plant-based, or something like that. There are a lot of layers.
Right. That's something I actually discovered myself during or little experiment with like go plant-based, because I take my own recipes. I used to tell people, because if I have a like chicken and broccoli, people are like, oh, how to make this with tofu? I just like, oh, you just replace the chicken with tofu. And I tried it myself. It doesn't work. I was like, no, no, something's lacking. I think you need something more. So because when you use tofu and tempeh or certain like when it's full plant-based, you do lose a little bit something when it's originally designed for meat, a recipe. So I do think you do need a little bit more like aromatics, like ginger, garlic, scallion. Very, very important in Chinese cooking. Always use it fresh. And almost we use it in almost every dishes. You do have to opt aromatics, and the sauce you might need to make a little bit strong. And sometimes you might want to throw in some peppers and like chili peppers to spice it up. So there are neat little tweaks that you need to do, and you do need to like browning tofu or like mushrooms or cauliflower to replace the protein. You do have to be conscious about how to create the texture to replace the meat from the dish.
Right. So as part of this whole process, what you've tried to do in the book is you've tried to make, as you said, try to make it approachable. And so you've broken different parts of the process down. And one of the things that one of the types of categories you had were basics, those things that you have, that you absolutely have to have. And then there's must-haves, which I still think you have to have. And then there's nice to haves. And then there's specialties like fermented tofu or rock sugar, yuba sheets. But the basics, for example, maybe let's look at each of these if you don't mind just a little bit. So basics are like cooking oil, salt, sweeteners, and tofu. That's what you have in the basics.
Yeah. Like I think these are, it's funny. I do get questions on the cooking oil a lot. People are asking what to use. My personal favorite is peanut oil. Very common in Northern Chinese cooking. It's not the regular peanut, like it's not the peanut oil you get from a regular grocery store, which usually has a pale yellow color. And when you smell it, it's like there's not much, flavor in it. It's like a neutral oil, kind of like canola or vegetable. The peanut oil we use are from Asian market, and it's made with like 100% peanut oil. It's not like blended. It has this like a golden color, and it's like it has a strong smell. It's almost smell like peanut butter. So I like to use it because one is because it stands high heat. You can use in the stir fry like no issues. And it's really nutty. So I just, so if I use that, I can skip sesame oil at the end, because I think a lot of people like to add the sesame oil at the end to boost the flavor. But if you use peanut oil, I think the dishes become a little bit more delicious because like it's just how nutty it is. But of course, like if you cannot find this, it is actually, you have to run to Asian market to get this. If you cannot find it, that's totally fine. I think any neutral oil, canola, vegetable, or avocado. Like avocado oil is actually very, very good because it is one of those, it stands very high heat. I think regular vegetable oil stand like 450, like the smoking point, versus avocado is stand for like 500. It's one of the very healthy ones. Any neutral oil will do. And then salt, I use sea salt and table salt in my recipes. I know a lot of chefs like to use kosher salt. If you use kosher salt, you probably need a little bit more. And if you and also I just like my personal note, the part of the region I'm from, we like to eat things that are savory and kind of salty. So if my dish is a little bit too salty for you, just replace the salt with kosher. I think it'll be fine. And then the sweetener is another part of, I think in Chinese cuisine, it's very, very common to use a little bit sugar. in like all kinds of, even it's a nutty or like a spicy sauce, you always see a little bit sugar. It really balances things out. It just makes things taste better. When you have the spicy, the savory, this little bit sugar kind of like bring things together. Um, I really encourage you to use that, even you're on a diet or something. Like I feel like if you just skip it, it kind of lose like the spirit. So yeah, those are the basics. And I mean, tofu is one of the, because it's a plant-based book.
Mhm.
So it's like very, very frequently used in all the recipes.
But I'd like to go into that a little bit more, simply
Mhm.
because I always pressed my tofu,
Yeah.
and you said right away. She said, I don't know why people do that all the time, and
So
and
yeah,
and
I know.
and not only that, but you mentioned, and I always buy firm or extra firm.
Mm.
Luckily, I had extra firm today, which is what it said to use for
Mhm.
that particular recipe.
Yeah.
But then you said, but wait a minute, but we make tofu in different firmnesses for a reason. It's not just,
Yeah, yeah.
so could you just explain a little bit about the tofu
Yeah, it's
way to handle it?
interesting because I know I talk to different chefs. Like everybody has their own method. I think I still have friends who insist that you must press it, otherwise there's no right. I do think when you make tofu in a stir fry, and especially when you need to marinate and create a very crispy texture, the firm or the extra firm, they're easier to use, and when you after you press them, they kind of absorb the marinade a little bit better. But I feel like, depending on how you use them, some because in this book I use some in the braising dishes, some are in the stir fry, some are um, I actually just eat directly cold. There are different ways to enjoy tofu, and like you mentioned, like what I've written in the book is created for different, like the soft and medium are created for a reason. And when you make tofu, it's made from soy milk and with coagulant. And after this, you just put them in the tofu like press. It gradually like press much water. You press the water out, it kind of like congeal and shrink. It become a block of tofu. And the way you make the firm tofu and extra firm tofu is you just press it more, and it become that. And I think if you press all your tofu, it eventually, it just become like this very firm block. It's kind of lose its nature. Like why you even press a medium if when you want a firm. I think for me, even for stir fries, when you want to crisp up, I still want the inside to be kind of tender.
Mhm.
Like, I don't want to be like, sometimes I maybe want to like chewy texture, but sometimes I want the inside to be like soft. Then
Mhm.
I use like a medium. And as for dishes like mapo tofu, if you go to a restaurant, like a really nice Sichuan restaurant, usually they use soft tofu. It's like they kind of just fall apart if you don't like spoon it out right. But that's how chefs use those like different textures to put a dish that has like, like there's like an interesting texture. And I do agree that soft tofu and medium can be a little bit tricky. If you've never dealt with that before and you started to stir them like a lot, it will fall apart. So you have to like pay some attention to that. And I do want to give a shout out to silk tofu. It's like I think people rarely use those, but it's so tasty. It's like a curd. It's like a kind of like a like a just like a curd, and it's so soft. Just with a little bit soy sauce and sesame oil and some scallion, it just tastes very good. That's a very refreshing taste.
Mm.
Yeah,
Nice. Thank you. So we've covered the basics. Let's go to the must-haves. That's garlic, ginger, scallions, cornstarch used as a sauce thickener, and to create a crispy crust, black vinegar, dark soy sauce, light and or regular soy sauce, peanut oil, which we've talked a little bit about.
yeah,
Here's one, Shaoxing wine. Is that right?
yeah.
Okay, and vegetarian oyster sauce. So there's quite a few must-haves, but maybe you could just talk about a two or three of them, just because these are the kind of ingredients that you essentially you buy and you keep them in your cupboard, and they're there for when you want to make your food, and the container they come in usually is enough for what, 3, 4, 5 months, depending upon how often you make this type of
Right.
cuisine.
They last really long. Like soy sauce and stuff like that. They stay really well for a very long time. You
Mhm.
don't need to refrigerate it. And one thing I want to mention is the Shaoxing wine here is very, very important. It's a type of wine that a cooking wine that's made with fermented grains. And I got question about from readers like, oh, can I use mirin or like other type of thing to replace it? The answer is like it's very, very different because mirin is sweet. It's like a sweet cooking wine versus Shaoxing wine is like very, very savory because it's like it has a longer fermented process and it has a much higher alcoholic content. And it has a color, it has a pale brown color, like a yellowish brown, I'd say, like a light soil, even like I compare it to even like a light soy sauce because it has that fermented umami in it. So the closest thing you can replace it with is dry sherry.
Mhm.
Uh, Unfortunately, because Shaoxing one it has a pretty high alcohol content in certain state, you cannot find them in a regular grocery store. And usually you can find the one that with a little bit salt added to it, just so they can sell this at a regular grocery store. It makes a little bit salty, but it doesn't really affect your cooking. That's totally fine. And if you cannot find this product, just go to a liquor store and get dry sherry. It's very close.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think one of the best aspects of the book, which is a very simple aspect, but it's something that is really critical, is that some of us live in small towns.
Hmm.
So we don't have the benefit of an Asian supermarket, for example, or
Yeah.
Asian food store.
Hmm.
Some of us may not have the freedom to travel around that much, or we may just enjoy shopping online. And you
Hmm.
give a number of different sources for where you can actually find all of these products, and
Yeah.
you give your favorite brands for all these different ingredients, and that's fantastic. And I can say, I've only used some of the ones from Mala Market, which I've loved
Hmm.
everything that I've bought from them. But you have at least, I think, 7, 8, 9 different places that we can order online. People can order online. So if
Yeah.
you can't
It's
find it, there you go.
it's getting very convenient these days, and I think a lot of things you can even find on Amazon, which is really I think 8 years ago after when I just moved to the US, that it's not that easy. It's like, but these days, like I think there's more and more. Like I'm glad that Chinese cooking is getting more popular, so there are more online stores that carry those products. So like you can totally do online shopping and get most of your ingredients.
Mhm. So I just want to go back to the must-haves for just a second,
Oh
because
yeah.
these are the aromatics that you were talking about before,
Hmm.
that they are just so necessary because they add just these layers of flavor
So
to
important. Yeah, there is ginger, scallion, and ginger, garlic, and scallion. Very, very important, especially for stir fries. Like in my book, I don't use all three. I use maybe like two or even just one. I try to make it really easy, but in reality, like everyday cooking, we try to use a little bit like three of them because it just by combining all of those aromatics, you put them in the hot oil to release fragrance. The oil it become like this, like really uh just like super super fragrant, and whatever you cook in it will taste good. And it's very important to use them fresh. Like take a little bit of time to cut them, but it's definitely worth it.
Mhm.
Worth
Okay,
worth the time. Yeah.
great. And then finally the nice to haves, or maybe not finally, but the nice to haves, I won't list all of them, but in that section of the cupboard, you have black bean paste, Chinese 5-spice powder, chili oil, Chinese sesame paste, rice vinegar, toasted sesame oil. Those are some of the nice to haves.
Yeah, I think this part is really depending on what type of cooking do you like and what flavor do you like. For example, the black bean sauce is like I feel like that's one of the popular ones. And if you like the taste of it, because it's very fermented, it's very savory. If you like this taste, then get this sauce and make some of the dish from the book. Like then you can make quite a few things. It's nice in the stir fry. It's nice for noodle sauce, and I shared quite a few recipes with it. And a chili oil is like really really essential for me. I feel like this is almost a must-have for me. But if you like spicy, like it's like the Chinese hot sauce. If you like hot sauce, then this is like a must-have. It's just it make everything taste good. Uh, for in the book I have like noodle dishes, stir fries, and even cold dishes. Like I, I think chili oil sometimes it's like you can even replace it's like an alternative of sesame oil because these are the oil that at the end of the cooking you just add a touch and it's just woo, it tastes, it's so fragrant. Sesame oil is like egg drop soup, the noodles and stuff, like you add just a touch or even a stir fry, it adds this nutty flavor. But if you like the spiciness, you just use chili oil, it make it really really stand out. So yeah, I want to explore this. Like I actually like all of them, but I think I try my best to tell people like you don't need everything. Pick some of your favorite if you don't have enough space at home, or you don't cook Chinese food that often. So don't get 100 ingredients. Get them like minimal pantry if you can.
And then some of them, though, in your homemade section, you actually have recipes so people could just make them themselves rather than.
Oh yeah. Chili oil is like so easy.
Mhm.
And that's much cheaper to make at home, and it tastes really fresh when you make it fresh. When you make it, it has this like stronger aroma.
Mhm.
Yeah, because it's fresh.
Well, that's what I like, is that you say it's far superior to store-bought, and so for me that like catches my attention immediately, because like if it's going to taste better, then I'm going to think very long and hard about making it myself then, because that's important, right? That's like the most important. Is it going to make it taste a lot better?
Yeah.
And I want to do it that way. And so you can make those things. And I noticed that one of the other ingredients that you talked about, that you made a specific point that if you make it at home, it's so much better, is seitan. And it was interesting to read about. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what's the difference, because people say, well, why do I want to make that at home? Why would I want to spend the time to do that? I can buy it prepared.
Seitan is like this is a topic I didn't touch too much. I think it's rather like quite niche. Like I feel like unless you're pretty hardcore like vegan or vegetarian, you might not make this. But it's an interesting topic because it is essentially Chinese vegetarian. It's called Buddhist cuisine. They use they use all kinds of way to make seitan for the mock meat texture. I only include this one way to make it because it's like the very basic one that you just use the gluten flour. It's called white gluten flour. So essentially, it's like a regular flour, but you take the gluten part out. That's the powder to make this dish. And you like mix it with water and boil them to cook it through to create those like little protein bites. And it has a nice texture because the store-bought one is kind of tough. I think there are quite a few seitan product these days. They're usually pre-seasoned. They're cut into those small pieces and are pre-seasoned for people to use as a replacement of meat. But when you make it yourself, you have the flexibility of like season it like the way you want it. And I do like the homemade version because it's a little bit tender. You have a kind of control of the texture. And when you make them fresh, it's like soft, but then then you pan fry. It has this very beautiful texture, like crispy. It's like really crispy. Like it kind of tastes like chicken.
Mm.
Yeah, like the store bought you cannot really do much about it. Like it's kind of like prepared to be like used directly. Versus this is like you can do a little bit further, like by seasoning it and pan fry it. It gets this nice, tender inside. It tastes kind of like meat and crispy outside.
I think this is really a very important point, because you mentioned that your husband, one of the reasons that you started adapting these recipes is because your husband is a runner and he's found that plant-based diet seems to help him recover quicker. So it works for him. And then you have been, not that you're vegan, but that you eat this way a lot, and you find that, instead of a 3-hour nap in the afternoon or 4 cups of coffee, you feel really great. And yet the real important element for people who do eat a lot of meat-based protein is there something that they can replace that with that satisfies that desire not just taste wise, but texture wise too.
Yeah.
And so you're making a case for that, because I can easily see, I was talking to somebody, they sent me a picture of something they ate a few weeks ago. And I said, oh, what's that? And they said, oh, it was some seitan that I bought at the store, some prepared seitan, and it wasn't very good. Well, what that does is it then automatically, for most people, just takes that off the table. It's just like, well, no, that stuff isn't any good. I can't, I need meat. And so what I love what you're saying is, but that's just a prepared food that, yeah, it's great. It makes it approachable for a lot of people. But hey, if you get a little bit of time, try this yourself, because you're going to be amazed at what happened. And I'll tell you, this was a personal experience today. Now, we do happen to eat mostly plant-based because my wife's been a vegetarian for forever, we'll say.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm an omnivore, but at home I eat plant-based most of the time, because that's just how it goes. And today when I made that tofu dish, and it's not that we don't make tofu dishes, because we do, but the savoriness of it and the texture of it, because of the way it was prepped, and it was essentially, coated nicely with a cornstarch. And so when it would hit that hot peanut oil, which I unfortunately had the refined peanut oil that you were talking about, and I would love to get some of the really good stuff that you mentioned, and I will. But it had this, it had a flavor that was very lovely, because I had marinated it, like you said, to do for a while, and it had a great texture to it. And one of the things that I said to my wife when I was eating this is, I said, this is the kind of thing that people who would like to eat less meat, if they want to do that, this is something that they could easily substitute and they wouldn't miss it. I mean, I'm making a generalized statement, but it's not that I'm trying to, make changes. I eat this way anyway. But it's just that it was the experience of eating it and going, this is not, we'll say, your typical tofu dish. This is a dish that satisfies on a deeper level. And I know I've gone on and on, but I wanted to try to communicate that, because I think
Thank you. Yeah, it's such a
it was a really fascinating experience, to have. So
that's how I feel about, like, one of the another inspiration of this book was when I was having those dishes at the vegetarian restaurant I really like in Chinatown. Well, after we moved to New York, there's some really good ones in New York, and they call it Buddhist cuisine, and it's all vegan actually. And it's just amazing. There are like hundreds of dishes on the menu, and I'm like, they're all like you can find almost everything there, and made with plant-based ingredient. And like you said, when I was eating at those restaurants, it was very, very satisfying. I feel like, oh, if I eat this, I don't need the meat. I feel like it's actually just like the level of satisfying, not just like, oh, it's kind of okay, I'm full, but I think I might need something else. And I think it's really interesting to explore, the flavor and texture of those dishes.
And also, I don't know, I hesitate to say this because I don't remember. I don't think you gave. There are other things that you can make at home, even stuff that you don't have to buy. I think like Chinese 5-spice powder. I don't think you gave the recipe for that. I can't remember.
I don't have that in the book, but you can make them. You don't have to buy it.
It's great. You make it at home, and it does the same thing that you're talking about, which is that you said in relation to the seitan, is that it's so fresh and delicious. So all right, well, great. Really, really excited about that. So my son just returned from visiting some friends, and one of the it was a couple out in California, out in Oregon, and she is from Northern China, and she cooked for him several times, Northern inspired dishes. And then when he came home, he looked over your book, and he was like so enthused to see, oh my gosh, she made dishes with cumin in it. And there's cumin in some of these recipes, that Maggie has in her book. And for me also, this was like, not having really any experience with actually looking at in depth at recipes for Chinese dishes. I was amazed. Wow, cumin. It's just not something that I, in my ignorance, would have associated with Chinese cooking.
Yeah, it's again, really a big country. So there's a very different flavor profile to explore. It's very, very interesting. I feel like when I talk to people, it's like, oh, I love lamb growing up. Like people are like, really? You eat lamb? Like, it's like just yeah. So cumin is that's from mostly from Xinjiang, which is in West China, and in that region there is actually a lot of Muslim, like ethnic wise, and the flavor is very very close. So because it's quite close to Turkey in that like direction, and there are a lot of flavor that share the same elements like some Middle Eastern cooking like kebab flavor, chili powder, cumin, a lot of like onion, pepper, and potato in that region, and
Okay.
is so those type of dishes are quite popular in Beijing. So it's kind of like what I've eaten growing up. So cumin for me is like, yeah, it's very Chinese for me. Yeah.
So I love that. Now, could you tell us a little bit about you have you have a website, Omnivores Cookbook, I think. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you offer, for people, anybody can get for free, just like a quick introduction. There's a little course that you offer, isn't there? Could you tell people a little bit about
Oh,
that?
just something if you sign up my newsletter, you will get a 5-day Chinese cooking. It's a little bit, it's just like little articles I wrote about, like how to navigate my website. And, if you start with like this and this, like something like egg drop soup and it's really easy. And then you can, if you never made those things before, you will discover like how easy it is to make those dishes at home. And they definitely tastes really, really nice. Like, like I have many readers, like they're like, oh my God, like I don't need to order takeout again. I'm just gonna make this. It's way
Right,
cheaper. Yeah.
right. Okay, so here's another one that I saw that was like fantastic. You can make your own smoked tofu at home, and it's not at all difficult.
Yeah, it is a little bit different. I have to admit, like it's actually a slightly different product. When you bake them, it firms up a little bit. It has an amazing flavor, like the smokiness. But the one that you buy that it does has a different texture.
Mhm.
Because it's a I think it's a different manufacture process because the smoked tofu you buy is like very very firm. It's almost like impossible to break them apart in the stir fry. Like you can literally you can shred them.
Mhm.
That's like how firm it is.
Mhm.
When you bake them like yourself, like in the recipe, it has like super nice. Like I love to make it just for the flavor of it, but it does like have a more soft texture, unfortunately, just because you're making it from regular tofu.
I,
But
I
yeah,
I think it's okay though.
yeah, it's nice. Like I like my vegetarian friends love it. Like because you can top it on like your rice bowls or like noodle bowls. Like just like make a really nice topping.
I've got to believe, I would love for you to share with us when you started putting out this information.
Hmm.
I'm assuming you didn't have any idea. You may have had some friends who said, "Oh, you should do a blog and tell people about Chinese food because they'll love it." And you probably had no idea, I bet, at the beginning that it would become so popular, number one. And number two, that people would be communicating with you and telling you how much you've enriched their cooking experience or their taste experience or their understanding. I would think that would be extremely fun and satisfying.
Yeah, I mean it's really such a nice, interesting journey. Like I mean, I did not expect anything. I mean, I thought I read some nice blogs. I was like, whoa, these are great. I would love to become popular, I guess. But I mean, there's no expectation. I never, I didn't know how to do things. I just put some recipe up there, and surprisingly, like people really like them. Yeah, that evolved all along the way. Like now I do it professionally, but it started very, very simple. And if you look at my first post, you can see my first picture. It's like pretty bad. Yeah.
Well, speaking of pictures, as I said at the outset, I mean the photography is super in the book, and all the dishes, uh, just they look lovely, and you did all that too. So you kind of like were the master of all aspects of this particular publication.
Thank you. I do really, really enjoy photography. Like that is actually one of my favorite part of the job. And I like to show it's some whenever I go to a restaurant, a Chinese restaurant, and then they have those ugly pictures, I was just like, I just kind of, I think they need to do something with it because the food can be so good, but if you shoot a picture like that, nobody's gonna eat it. So I'm trying my best to be like, okay, it looks really appetizing and it should taste good too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I use the word teasing because I think that's what it made me feel. It's how it made me feel. That was
Mm.
it conveyed that feeling. All right, so if you had to just synthesize what you'd like to tell people now that they've listened to us for go on talk about the book for almost an hour, what is it that you want people to leave with, in terms of their thought process about the book, Chinese cooking, Chinese food, whatever?
I think actually my biggest wish is to, if you I hope you can try something. No matter it's something you're familiar with. It's like, oh, I just want to do this takeout dish I really loved from a restaurant, or maybe be a little bit more open-minded, like try something that you don't know, and it might surprise you. That's how I feel about it because I hope I love all my recipes, and I hope that if you try something out that maybe you never heard of it, maybe like if it has like ingredients that you like, and just give it a try. I think you might like it. Yeah.
So we always read articles about comfort food.
Mm.
I'm interested to know what for you is comfort food. Is it some Chinese dish, or are there other dishes that you fit into that category for
For
yourself?
me, it's like really simple things. Like my comfort food is like fried rice and
Mm,
congee. Like, super, super simple. But it can just have like three ingredients, but it's like very hearty. Yeah. Those are
nice,
comfort food for me. Yeah.
nice, nice, nice. And is there? I know this isn't the case because you chose all these recipes with purpose in mind. But is there something that you find yourself going back to more than other things? Other than the comfort food that you mentioned, but is there one or two dishes that you just like?
Oh, for me, I make those stir fries all the time. Like everything that is like, I have a four ingredient okra. Like
Mhm.
literally take like five, like when I just need to have something quick, take 5 minutes. It's just so convenient. Like I feel like all the stir fries, those very simple vegetable dishes, they're just like because I make mostly and like the Chinese broccoli with oysterless sauce. It's like it takes no time to put it together, and you have this like very nice vegetable dish to accompany with whatever else you're having. I because I make those things every day.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
So there was one thing that we touched on, but then I forgot to mention, ask you to mention it again, and that was equipment, because we've talked a lot about ingredients, and you mentioned equipment a little bit earlier when you talked a little bit about that wasn't
Hmm.
necessary to have a wok, and I used, for example, a large skillet today. But when you mentioned in the book about equipment, you really boil, you pare it down to just a large skillet, a stir fry spatula, a sharp knife, a steamer, and some saucepans. And yes, there are other pieces of equipment that you could have, but
Yeah.
you basically say that's it. You just need these few little pieces. It's not
Yeah, you
complicated.
don't need much. Chinese kitchen is really simple. I think in China usually it's a wok, and a knife, like a sharp knife. Like we always get the best. Don't forget to sharpen it. You have to sharpen your knife very frequently to make your cooking very easy. But as long as you have those like few basic things, I think you can make like the majority of the dishes. You do need like sometimes I need a pot to boil things. But I assume like most kitchen you already have those things.
Mhm. Right.
But yeah, you don't need a complicated setup.
Great. So
Mm.
Maggie, thank you so much for taking the time to chat. It's been a pleasure. I've learned an awful lot, and it's made me feel more excited about integrating more Chinese dishes into our cooking regime here, which is something that I have, I'd say, been reticent to do for many, many years. And now I feel like, seeing this book, it's not only approachable, but it works for the situation that I have where my wife has this particular diet that she follows. So I just want to give you a personal shout out to say thank you, for that.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so happy to hear it. And it's so much fun to talk to you. It's great.
It was
Yeah.
great. It was great. Maggie
Yeah.
Zhu is the author of Chinese Homestyle Cooking, Everyday Plant-Based Recipes for Takeout, Dim Sum, Noodles, and more. And her blog is Omnivores Cookbook. You can find her, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, at what on Instagram?
Omnivores Cookbook.
At Omnivores Cookbook on Instagram. And it's omnivorescookbook.com online. So really, I hope we've inspired you to cook a little bit of Chinese food at home. You've been listening or maybe watching Great Taste, 60 Minutes of Deliciousness. I'm your host, Steve Boss.